Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, well, welcome. And you are on Varietal Literature's YouTube page. There's just a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And what we do here on Tuesday nights at 6:30, my time, which is Pacific, is we read old folklore and fairy tales. And if you are not watching this live, then down in the description below will be little timestamps to each of the stories we're going to read tonight, and you can jump ahead to those if you don't really want to mingle in the beginning here. That's completely fine. As far as if you are here live, though, you can join me in the chat. There is a live chat here, and I see GS is here and says good evening. Good evening, GS. Thank you for watching. If I sound a little strange, it's because I tried inhaling some water before I came live here, which delayed my start a bit. It's not a thing I plan to try again, though it is a thing I've tried before. And by tried, I'm joking. I accidentally did it. So, what are we doing tonight? Well, we're getting into some winter tales proper. And I say winter because most of them aren't really going to be Christmas tales. And I'll explain why in a minute. There's a few things I need to say at the beginning here. Since this is sort of our first stream of the season where I'm reading seasonal stuff, for sure. A couple of things. Christmas has become much bigger as a sort of source of stories in the last 120 years-ish than it ever was before. I guess that's a debatable thing. But in general, that's sort of the impression you get, at least for the style of story that we associate to Christmas, which tends to be things like The Christmas Carol from Dickens. But the actual time of Christmas, the solstice, if you will, historically in folklore, has been very differently seen. So the 12 Days of Christmas we talked about last year, almost exactly 1 year ago in our one on the Wild Hunt, the 12 Days of Christmas used to be not Christmas at all. It was 12 days around the solstice of winter, and it was said that Thor or Odin, or, it's a little hard to know. I think it's generally Thor, though, would ride with the Valkyries for 12 days, and you wouldn't go out at night, but you would feast in the day, and they'd bring there's a mixture of beliefs around it. Anyways, it'd be 12 days, which would stretch through into January. And that was one conception of tales and stories. Big battling gods would come riding through the sky for 12 days. So it wasn't like sit around the peaceful Christmas tree. And then the other version that you tend to get a lot, kind of even still, around Christmas, is that Christmas was, or at least this time of year, the solstice, was maybe a little closer in nature to Halloween. We talked about this last year in my scary Christmas ghost stories about Christmas or something like that. I forget what it's called. We talked about it there, that actually scary stories around Christmas was really common, particularly ghosts and spirits. And that's also not hard to believe if you've ever been in a place that is truly departed from society. You're really in the woods without electricity, really, in the winter. You hear things. It's not hard to anticipate or see, why ghost stories got associated with that time of year. And so for that reason, I'm sure I don't know exactly every story I'm going to read for the next few weeks, but if I can find some more Christmas era or winter ghost stories, I will. But what we're going to read tonight are winter folktales. And they're all coming to us from the Brothers Grimm, which is actually a collection I don't often read. And the reason that I don't often read it is because they're very popular. Brothers Grimm is well exposed. There's a lot of really great YouTube channels that have already recorded readings of 10 times over of most of the Brothers Grimm's tales. Now and then I'll dip into them just because I like them. But for the most part, I don't read them too much because they're already well known. I tend to read, yes, German folklore is one of the mainstays on this channel, but not so much Brothers Grimm stuff. Here and there, but not so much. And coming back to it this week, full bore, has led me to the question of, does German folklore deserve its reputation of being a bit brutal, or is it just the Brothers Grimm? Like, is it just that the Brothers Grimm are a bit psychotic in how they assemble their tales? And let me explain. All folklore has some instances, eventually, all areas of folklore, of violence and cruelty. Usually quite abrupt and unexpected. Like some dog will get stomped on or something. And you'll be like, what the hell? However, it is rarely so gruesome and plentiful and torturous as it is in the Brothers Grimm. And you might say, well, are you saying that the Brothers Grimm invented this stuff? You know, they just collected folktales. That's true. But generally speaking, folklore collectors will go to an area and collect 10 to 12 different versions of a story. Sometimes more, sometimes less. And then when they assemble their collections, they will sort of choose which endings, middles, and sections that make it into their sort of canon version of it, if such a word should ever be used here. It probably shouldn't. And then in the footnotes, they'll note that there are other endings. And it seems like the Brothers Grimm always picks the most torturous and brutal endings. And I don't know why that is. But coming back to it, after a year of reading German folklore that was largely not the Brothers Grimm's collections, although some of it definitely was, and just seeing these two violent stories, ostensibly for kids, was a bit of a shock. So maybe it's just me, but I'm going to read you two tales, loosely set around winter. One of them more explicitly around winter. One is more an explanation about how winter happens. And just know that there were worse than this, that I went, this is too violent for Christmas. I'm not going to do that. Maybe I will yet. I don't know. If you want to know what one of the most brutal ones Brothers Grimm has, in my opinion, the juniper tree, which I think I might have read before, definitely not at Christmas. I may yet read, but not without a lot of content warnings, because Jesus, it is brutal. Okay. So with that said, we're going to read some Brothers Grimm winter folktales. We're going to read two on the longer side, for two different reasons, but they are connected by this idea of being just kind of mean to young girls for not doing chores, or sometimes not even that, not even really doing anything wrong. Anyways, they are entertaining, I promise you that. So, that's a little bit on what to expect from winter tales on this channel. Not many of them will explicitly reference Christmas, because there just aren't that many that do that from that era, from the eras that folklore developed mostly. And winter is often more scary than it was cheerful. So we'll, get into stuff like that this month. But specifically tonight, we're reading the Brothers Grimm, and we're reading some tales that are grim indeed. And our first tale tonight is called The Three Little Men in the Wood. And it comes to us from a collection on Project Gutenberg called Grimm's Fairy Tales. There's two called this, but you can find this story everywhere, frankly. There was once a man whose wife died, and a woman whose husband died. Now the man had a daughter, and the woman also had a daughter. The girls, the daughters, were acquainted with each other, and they went walking together and came to the woman's house. Then she said to the man's daughter, "Listen, tell your father that I would like to marry him. Then you shall wash yourself in milk every morning and drink wine. But my own daughter shall wash herself in water and drink water." Now, just pausing here for a moment. Washing yourself in milk, even now, would be considered sort of a weird thing to do. But especially back then was associated, obviously, with excess, because it's a nutritional substance. It's frankly being wasteful food. But it was associated to ideas of like making your skin softer, because milky white skin, milk. So it's like, you will live like royalty. So the girl went home, told her father what the woman had said. And the man said, "Oh, what shall I do? Marriage is a joy, but also a torment." At last, as he could not decide, he pulled off his boot and said, "Take this boot. It has a hole in the sole of it. Go with it upstairs to the loft and hang it on the big nail. Then pour water into it. If it holds the water, then I will again take a wife. But if it runs through, I will not." Also, chat, you're welcome to explain the logic on this one to me. So the girl did as she was ordered, but the water drew the hole together, and the boot became full to the top. She informed her father how it had turned out. So he himself went up, and when he saw that she was right, he went back to that widow, and he wooed her, and the wedding was celebrated. Now the next morning, when the two girls got up, there stood before the man's daughter milk for her to wash in and wine for her to drink. But before the woman's daughter stood water to wash herself and water for drinking. Now on the second morning, there stood water for washing and water for drinking before the man's daughter as well as before the woman's daughter. And on the third morning stood water for washing and water for drinking before the man's daughter, and milk for washing and wine for drinking before the woman's daughter. And like that, so it continued. If you didn't follow that, she only did what she said she would one day, then flipped it by the third. The woman became bitterly unkind to the man's daughter. Day by day, she did her best to treat her still worse. She was envious, too, because the man's daughter was beautiful and lovable, and her own daughter ugly and repulsive. One day, in winter, when everything was frozen as hard as a stone and hill and vale lay covered with snow, the woman made a frock of paper, called the man's daughter, and said, "Here, put on this dress and go out into the wood and fetch me a little basketful of strawberries. I have a fancy for some." "Alas," said the girl, "no strawberries grow in winter. The ground is frozen, and beside the snow has covered everything. Why am I to go in this paper frock? It is so cold outside that one's very breath freezes. The wind will blow through the frock, and the thorns will tear it off my body." "Will you contradict me again?" said the woman. "See that you go, and do not show your face again until you have the basket full of lovely strawberries." Then she gave her a little piece of hard bread and said, "This will last you the day," but thought, "You will die of cold and hunger outside and will never again be seen by me." Well, the girl obeyed. She put on the paper frock and went out with the basket. Far and wide there was nothing but snow. Not a green blade to be seen, and certainly not strawberries. When she got into the wood, she saw a small house, out of which peeped 3 little dwarfs. Well, she wished them good day, and knocked modestly at the door. And they cried, "Come in!" And so she entered the room and seated herself on a bench by the stove. where she began to warm herself by their fire and eat her breakfast. Well, the dwarf said, "Give us some of it." "Willingly," said she, and divided her bit of bread in two and gave them the half. And they asked, "Why do you here in the forest in the winter time? What do you? You're in such a thin dress." "Ah," she answered, "I'm to look for a basket full of strawberries, and not to go home until I can take them with me." Well, when she had eaten her bread, they gave her a broom and said, "Sweep away the snow at the back door with it." But when she was outside, the three little men said to one another, "What shall we give her, as she is so good and shared her bread with us freely?" Then said the first, "My gift," and there's three gifts coming here. I want chat to tell me which one seems a little less gifty than the other three. Then said the first, "My gift is that every day she shall grow more beautiful." The second said, "My gift is that gold pieces shall fall out of her mouth every time she speaks." And the third said, "My gift is that a king shall come and take her to be his wife." The girl, however, who had done as the little men had bidden her, swept away the snow behind the little house with a broom, and what did she find but real ripe strawberries there under the snow in the middle of winter, which had come up quite dark red out of the frozen ground. In her joy, she hastily gathered her basketful, thanked the little men, and shook hands with each of them, then ran home to take the woman what she had longed for so much. When she went in and said, "Good evening," a piece of gold at once fell out of her mouth. Thereupon she related what happened to her in the wood, but with every word she spoke, gold pieces fell from her mouth until very soon the whole room was covered with them. Sorry, caught on a cable here. There we go. We're back. "Now look at her pride," cried the woman's daughter, "to throw about gold in that way." But she was secretly envious of it and wanted to go into the forest to seek strawberries, but, of course, gold. Her mother said, "No, my dear little daughter, it is too cold. You might die of cold," holding her close. However, as her daughter let her have no peace, the mother at last yielded, made her a magnificent dress of fur, which she was obliged to put on, and gave her bread and butter and cake to take with her. The girl went into the forest and straight up to that little house. And the three little men, they peeped out, one by one, once again. Without looking round at them, and without speaking to them, she went awkwardly into the room and just seated herself by the stove, and began to eat her butter and cake. "Give us some of it," cried the little man. But she replied, "There's not enough for myself, so how can I give it away to other people?" When she'd done eating, they said, "Well, there's a broom for you. Sweep all clean for us outside by the back door." "Oh, sweep for yourselves," she answered. "I'm not your servant." And when she saw that they were not going to give her anything, she went out the door. It was then that the little men said to each other, "What shall we give her? As she is so naughty and has a wicked, envious heart. That will never let her do a good turn to anyone." They're going to list 3 curses here. I want chat to tell me which one seems perhaps a little more brutal than the rest. The first said, "I grant that she grow uglier every day." The second said, "I grant that at every word she says a toad shall spring out of her mouth." And the third said, "I grant that she may die a miserable death." The maiden looked for strawberries outside, but as she found none, she went angrily home. And when she opened her mouth and was about to tell her mother what had happened to her in the woods, with each word she said, a toad sprang out of her mouth, so that everybody was seized by the horror of her. Then her mother was still more enraged and thought of nothing but how to do every possible injury to the man's daughter, whose beauty, however, grew daily greater. At length she took a cauldron and set it on the fire and boiled yarn in it. When it was boiled, she flung it on the poor girl's shoulder, gave her an axe in order that she might go out on the frozen river and cut a hole in the ice, rinse the yarn. She was obedient, and went thither and cut a hole in the ice, and while she was, in the midst of her cutting, a splendid carriage came driving up, in which sat a king. And the carriage stopped, and the king asked, "My child, who are you, and what are you doing here?"
I'm a poor girl, and I'm rinsing yarn."
Then the king felt compassion, and when he saw that she was so very beautiful, compassion, that's what he felt, he said to her, "Will you go away with me?"
"Oh, yes, with all my heart," she answered, for she was glad to get away from the mother and sister.
So she got into the carriage and rode away with the king. And when they arrived at his palace, well, the wedding was celebrated with great pomp. And as the little man had granted to the maiden in their blessings. I am missing part of the story. Where is it? Just a second. Did it cut off the ending? Give me a minute. That is not the end of the story. I don't understand. There must be a variant version I downloaded. Let me dig it up. Because I had read it in a slightly different context. That's never happened before. Give me a second. There is a whole third act to this story. Let me pull it up. I will put a timestamp if you're not watching this live. I will put a timestamp that gets you to where it is. This one is called Three Little Men in the Woods. We're just going to have to switch over to a slightly different format. Okay, I'm going to put you to the wait screen for a second because I got to add some stuff. I'll be right back. All right. You're probably going to have a hard time reading this because it is just a web page. But thank you to the Pittsburgh University for having the full text of this. Okay. There we go. So, I am a poor girl rinsing yarn is where we were. The king felt compassion, and when he saw how very beautiful she was, he said to her, "Will you ride with me?" "Gladly," she answered, for she was happy to get away from her mother and sister. She got into the carriage and rode away with the king. And when they arrived at the palace, their wedding was celebrated with great pomp, just as the little men had promised the girl. A year later, the young queen gave birth to a son, and when the stepmother heard of her good fortune, she came with her daughter to the palace, pretending that she wanted to pay her a visit. But when the king went out, no one else was present, while the wicked woman seized the queen by the head, and her daughter seized her by the feet, and lifting her out of her bed, they threw her out of the window into the stream that flowed by. You can see why they cut this section out in the other collection. I just didn't expect it. I read it in one way and then saw it in another collection. I was like, same title, it should be the same. After that, the ugly daughter lay down in the bed, and the old woman covered her up over her head. And when the king returned and wanted to speak to his wife, the old woman said, "Quiet, quiet. You cannot talk to her now. She has a very high fever. You must let her rest today." Well, the king suspected no evil and did not return until the next morning. As he then talked with his wife, and she answered him, a toad jumped out with every word, where previously the gold had fallen out. And when he asked what was the matter, the old woman said that it came from her high fever, and that she would soon lose it. During the night, the kitchen boy saw it takes a real left turn. The kitchen boy saw a duck swimming along the gutter, and it said, "King, what are you doing? Are you awake or are you sleepy?" Receiving no answer, it said, "What are my guests doing?" Then the kitchen boy answered, "They are fast asleep." She asked further, "What is my little baby doing?" He answered, He is sound asleep in this cradle." Then, in the form of the queen, she went upstairs, nursed the baby, fluffed up his cover, tucked him in, and then she swam off through the gutter as a duck. She came in the same manner for 2 nights, and on the 3rd night she said to the kitchen boy, "Go tell the king to take his sword, and on the threshold to swing it over me 3 times. The kitchen boy ran and told this to the king, and who came with his sword, and swung it over the spirit 3 times. And after the 3rd time, his wife was standing before him, vigorous, alive, and healthy as she had been before. The king was elated, but he kept the queen hidden in a room until the Sunday when the baby was to be baptized. At the baptism, he said, 'What does a person deserve who drags someone out of bed and throws him into the water?' And the old woman answered, 'Oh, that scoundrel deserves nothing better than to be put into a barrel stuck full of nails and then rolled downhill into the water.' Then the king said, 'You have pronounced your own sentence.' And he ordered such a barrel to be brought. The old woman and her daughter were put into it. The top was hammered shut, and the barrel was rolled downhill until it fell into the river." Now, sorry for the break in the middle there. You can see why it's important to me to read the end of the story. 'Cause what happened? Let's take a quick stock before moving on to the second story. She was thrown out the window into a river, unexpectedly. Turned into a duck, never explained why. Seemed to be able to shapeshift willingly to care for her baby, but otherwise went back to being a duck. And then waited 3 days before she told the king how to break it. God knows why. And then finally, when faced with a question of a very specific description of the crime you committed 3 days ago, the old woman, or her mother, thought up the most horrible punishment I've ever heard of, and then seems to be surprised when it was obviously about her. Also, as GS said, that's a brutal way to go. It is brutal. It's just so unnecessarily gruesome and violent. I don't know that I've ever even heard of this happening. I'm sure it's happened before. I don't think they just made it up, but my God, is that brutal. All right. Now the next story, not quite as violent, like explicitly violent, but it sure is brutal in a whole new way. Although now I'm obviously concerned that maybe it's a different version, but I'm going to say also a couple of things on it before I get into it. It has a similar idea at its core. It is about 2 daughters and one being lazy, and so but I stumbled across the story in a different way, other than it being one of the more famous of the Brothers Grimm's lesser-known tales, I guess. GS says rivers do that. She had to be a duck to survive the river. Yeah, that's right. You fall into a river, turn into a duck. I guess I've never swum in a river before. If you've turned into a duck when you swam in a river, let me know in the comments below. This is called Mother Holle, which is really Frau. Mother, woman, lady, whatever, Frau. And it says on the Wikipedia page that this story has some relationship to Frau Gauden, who is my all-time favorite folklore, German folklore character, who we covered in the Wild Hunt streams we did last year. I don't see any relationship between this story and any of the ones I read about Frau Gauden at all. Frau Gauden's more of a neutral, good, chaotic, neutral kind of character. This one is more explicitly good. There's no mention of her daughters or her love of hunting. I don't know. Maybe Wikipedia knows something I don't know, but I don't know where they're getting that from. But Mother Holle is supposedly the bringer of snow, which we will find out how she does that in this tale. It's not really the focus of the tale, but it does make it wintry. Just gonna set some stuff up here, and then we will get right on it. So just before we get into the story, a couple of things. I've mentioned before the importance of weaving and the devices that are used for weaving, and that comes to matter in this story, so I'll just briefly remind you. Weaving is done a few different ways, but it involves a spindle and usually a wheel. You can apparently just do it with the spindle, but a kind of wheel. The traditional version we've seen is sort of a foot-powered wheel. That might have been a bit of later invention, but it might have been the one they're describing here. But the story comes to wrap itself around a thing called, I want to make sure I got the right word here, I think it's called a carriage? Or shuttle, that's it. And the shuttle is just a little piece that is run along the, and helps guide the twisting thread. If I'm remembering correctly, I mean, there's possibly, I did actually use one of these before. But nonetheless, it's a piece that is removable and easy to lose, especially if your hands are getting tired, which are sort of is the subtext of the opening premise of this. Okay. Our second story tonight also comes to us from the Brothers Grimm. It's called Mother Holle. And, yeah, you can get it on Project Gutenberg. Oh, yes, right, Genera. You're correct. It is spinning. Spinning is what I meant to say, not weaving. It is about spinning, not weaving. There was once a widow who had 2 daughters, one of whom was beautiful and industrious, whilst the other was ugly and lazy. But she was much fonder of the ugly and lazy one. I mean, who was written? This is written by the good-looking girl? Every day, the other poor girl had to sit by a well in the highway and spin and spin and spin till her fingers bled. She dipped it in the well to wash the stains off. Now it happened one day that the shuttle was stained with her blood, and she dipped it in the well to wash the stains off, and it dropped out of her hand and it fell to the bottom. And she began to weep, and ran to the woman and told her of the mishap. Well, the woman, she scolded her hard, and was so cruel as to say, "Since you have let the shuttle fall in, you must fetch it out again." And so the girl went back to the well and did not know what to do. Then in the anguish of her heart, she jumped into the well to get the shuttle. And she lost her senses, which is an old-timey way of saying she knocked herself out. But when she awoke and came to herself, she was in a lovely meadow, where the sun was shining and 1,000 flowers were growing. Along this meadow she went, and at length came to a baker's oven full of bread, and the bread in it cried out, saying, "Oh, take me out, or I shall burn. I am well baked." So she went up to the oven and with the bread shovel took out all the loaves, one after the other. And just a reminder at this point, and up till quite close to modern day, many ovens for bread were communal. People would book them in, pay a price, bake in them. So to burn your bread is to not have it for the month. After that, she went on till she came to a tree covered with apples, and it called to her, "Oh, shake me, shake me! We apples are all ripe." So she shook the tree till the apples fell like rain, and went on shaking till they were all down, and when she had gathered them into a heap, she went on her way. At last she came to a little house, out of which an old woman was peeping, and she had such large teeth that the girl was frightened and was about to run away. At last, but the old woman called out to her, "What are you afraid of, my child? Stay with me. If you will do the work in my house carefully, you shall be better for it. Only you must take care to make my bed well, and to shake it thoroughly till the feathers fly, for then it snows on earth. I am Mother Holle." As the old woman spoke so kindly to her, the girl took heart and willingly entered her service. She did everything to the old woman's satisfaction, and always shook her bed so hard that the feathers flew about like snowflakes. So she lived happily with her, never an angry word, and boiled or roasted meat every day. She stayed some time with Mother Holle. Then she grew sad. At first she did not know what was the matter with her, but by and by she found that it was homesickness. Don't ask me. I don't know. That's what the story says. I don't say how. Although she was many thousand times better off here than at home, still she had a longing to be home. At last she said to the old woman, "I am longing for home. However well off I am down here, I cannot stay any longer. I must go up again to my own people." And Mother Holle said, "I am pleased that you long for your home again. You have served me so faithfully that I myself will take you up again." And thereupon she shook her by the hand and led her to a large door. And the door was open, and just as the girl was standing beneath the doorway, no one in chat is going to expect the next line, a heavy shower of gold rain fell, and all the gold stuck to her so that she was covered with it. Now, I know I'm on the internet, so I'm just pausing for everyone to collect themselves for that sentence and its implications. And now I'm moving on. "You shall have that, because you are so industrious," said Mother Holle, and at the same time she gave her back the shuttle which she had let fall into the well. Thereupon the door closed. And the girl found herself upon the cold earth again, not far from her mother's house. And as she went into the yard, the cock was standing by the well and cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your golden girls come back to you." So she went on to her mother, and as she was thus covered with gold, she was welcomed by both her and the sister. And there is a picture. I'm going to expand this because this is quite the picture of it happening. And again, I know I'm on the internet. Just going to move on. The girl told all that happened to her. As soon as the mother heard how she'd come by such great riches, she was anxious for the same good fortune to befall her ugly and lazy daughter. She had to seat herself by the well and spin, and in order that her shuttle might be stained with blood, she stuck her hand into a thorn bush and pricked her finger, and then she threw the shuttle into the well and jumped in after it. She came like the other to the beautiful meadow. Why do I keep saying menu? And walked along the very same path. And when she got to the oven, the bread cried again, "Oh, take me out! Take me out, or I shall burn! I am well baked." But the lazy thing answered, "As if I wanted to soil myself." And on she went. Soon she came to the apple tree, which cried, "Oh, shake me, we apples are all ripe." But she answered, "I like that. One of you might fall on my head." And on she went. When she came to Mother Holle's house, she was not afraid, for she had already heard about her big teeth, and she hired herself out immediately. The first day, she made herself work diligently and obeyed Mother Holle when she told her to do anything, for she was thinking of all the gold she would give her. But on the second day, she began to be lazy, and on the third day, still more so. For then she would not get up in the morning, neither did she make Mother Holle's bed carefully, nor shake it so as to make the feathers fly up. Mother Holle was soon tired of this, and gave her notice to leave, and the lazy girl was willing to go, and thought that now the gold rain would come. Mother Holle led her to the great doorway, but while she was standing under it, instead of gold, a big kettle full of pitch was emptied over her. Now let's pause for a second. Pitch is a resin. It traditionally is like tar nowadays, but pitch can also be like a pine resin or whatever else. In order for it to be liquid like this, it's really hot. So, in other words, she just scalded a woman. Anyways, carrying on, just making sure you understand the severity of that. "That is the reward for your service," said Mother Holle, and shut the door. So the lazy girl went home. She was covered with pitch, and the cock by the well, as soon as he saw her, cried out, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your pitchy girls come back to you." But the pitch stuck fast to her and could not be gotten off so long as she lived. I mean, obviously she's not the hero, but geez, that's a brutal thing to do to someone for just being a bit lazy. Jum NHM Store. I'm not going to pretend that I know how to pronounce that and do disservice to your name, has joined the chat. Thank you for joining the chat. Says, "Bread, I am well bake." Me, lol, samesies. And they also say the first story's ending sounded like a ripoff of The Sun, the Moon, and Talia. Well, in folklore, ripoff isn't even a concept that exists. They are all taking pieces from each other. They're sort of, you can think of them a little bit like blues riffs. You know, like there's like 15 different stories at least in Germany alone that start with the exact same premise as to why the name Snow White Rose Red is chosen, right? Genera says, "I think it's a common way of punishing wrongdoers in fairy tales. Oh, to pour pitch on them? You do see it a bit. Usually for doing a bit more than just being lazy, though. Lazy and greedy. Definitely a harsh punishment. Not surprising for the time. Well, that's what I mean, though. Like, I've been reading German folklore for the last year. The stuff that traditionally doesn't make it to English, thanks to Jürgen Hubert. That stuff is nowhere near as sadistic as the Brothers Grimm. They just tend to always take the most sadistic angles. GS says, "Don't be lazy or you'll get pitched." Yeah, standard generally held to young girls in folklore and not young boys. The two tales there are based around winter. I do like the idea of Mother Hall being the origin of snow. But it's that time of the show where, when we have it, I read to you some translator's notes. So let me pull that up now. Okay. So this part of the show is called Translator's Notes, and what it is some of the works that I read have been translated by people recently who are contemporaries that I talk to regularly. And when I read their translations, sometimes they add context or answer questions from chat in the comments of the video. And of course, not a lot of people go back and look at those comments, so I like to read them now. And I'm going to put up the translator notes screen so you know that these words are not my own, so I don't take credit for stuff I didn't do. Today's notes, though, come to us from Jürgen Hubert. Jürgen Hubert is a translator of German folklore that has never been translated into English before. You can support him on Patreon at Sunken Castles Evil Poodles and get lots and lots of folklore. Not fairy tales, really, folklore, which is much weirder. And if you want to sort of samples of what that looks like, I've done many streams of his stuff over the last year. But let's see what this is from the video, The Flaming Cow of Eisnock, that I did on his translations, and let's see what he has to say about that. I mostly draw the texts I translate from the 19th century sources, which strikes a nice balance between public domain text and still largely readable by modern readers. Older German texts have an unfortunate tendency towards sentences that last for several pages, and that's more hassle to translate than I care for. On to his next point. I find your hypothesis about snakes and tall grass to be interesting, but I should point out that there are multiple tales from German folklore about stable-dwelling snakes. The whole myth complex of German snake folklore is deeply weird because it's both very widespread and utterly different from how other animals are portrayed. Snakes are the only animal which are consistently portrayed as having kings or queens. I'd be very much interested if this kind of narrative shows up in other cultures as well, since I suspect it to be a very old folkloric narrative, but as of yet, I don't have any evidence for this. Regarding Genera's comments, I have 2 books published so far, with a third one in preparation. The first one is a grab bag of the first 155 German folk tales I've translated. After that, I decided to reboot my approach to book publication by publishing them as a series of books with 100 tales each, and each book focusing on a particular topic. And his final point, I found Bewitched Butter, which wasn't one he translated, it was an Irish tale, to be interesting because many of its tropes show up in German folk tales as well. There too, it is possible to summon a witch or other person who has harmed you to your house if you know how. Using magic to suck the milk from your neighbor's cow is also very common, which in turn allows you to sell more butter and milk than others. And there are a lot of tales where witches in animal forms are deliberately injured, and this injury remains even when they turn back into human form. Just for my own commentary there, to remind people, my theory was about snakes drinking milk from the cattle, I think it was, or something else. And I said, they take cattle out into tall grass where snakes sometimes frequent. The cows might startle them and the snakes bite them, and they thought maybe they were trying to drink milk. That was just sort of my hypothesis. It doesn't, like most of this stuff, I'm just sort of postulating. I'm not speaking with any authority. Okay. Jum Store. Have you ever heard the fairy tale The Boy Who Found Fear? It's not widely known. It's a shame because it's so hilarious. Not too morbid, which is nice and rare in fairy tales. Let me see. I might have. Boy Who Found Fear. Oh, it's an Andrew Lang collection one. I have read most of his collections, not on this channel, but personally, I might have heard it. I will take a look at it because it interests me. I wonder where it comes from. Is it English? Is it Celtic? Nordic? Based on a tale from the German state of Mecklenburg. Okay. Cool. Thank you for the recommendation. I'll take a look at it. All right. Well, if you guys want more winter folklore read aloud, some of it a little more wintry and some of it straight up Christmassy, which is a rare thing in folklore, as I covered in the beginning. I have finally created a little selections, like I did for Halloween, a little selections of the last couple of years of Christmas folklore that I've read. If you're looking for a recommendation, I think the most popular one of the bunch is the Christmas Ghost Stories one. But for my money, I just loved the whole Wild Hunt at Christmas thing. So it's not Christmas until Odin raids the countryside. Is one of my favorite series of things. I've done some. I haven't released any yet because I'm trying to get some money together to edit them. But I am a writer, for people who don't know, and I am rewriting certain pieces of folklore just for fun, not for really any other reason. I find that I keep finding reasons to insert Frau Gauden, which was discussed in the Wild Hunt one, to keep inserting Frau Gauden into anything I can do. I inserted her into my D&D game, which I explained on another stream. I just love Frau. She's I sort of fuse her a bit with Thor, because Thor was probably the original leader of the Wild Hunt. Well, at least one of them. It varies, especially for a lot of that old Nordic myth outside of the Edda and those epics, which are not particularly detailed or consistent with themselves. A lot of it was just oral history. And of course, the Edda was written a couple of centuries after these stories had been circulated. And as a result, it's seeing through glass darkly to know who was where and what was expected and what God did what. But it's either Odin or Thor, usually. Anyways, GS says lists are great, makes it much easier to find. I'm glad that people like them. I don't know why I didn't do them sooner. I don't know. I'm a writer who likes reading old folklore. Maybe I'm not the most refined marketer in the world. But here is some great marketing for you. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Is there any way to say that isn't annoying? But if you did like the video, do consider giving it a like. And if you like if you like sitting here and hearing tales told by Fireside, we do this every Tuesday, and we're going to be doing wintry stuff into the next few weeks. Every Tuesday except for the one around Christmas, because I take 1 week off a year. Beyond that, if you really loved it, you can always go to the Buy Me a Coffee, but you don't have to do that. And beyond that, thank you, Jum Store, and Janera and GS for keeping me such good company with the stories tonight. I'll be back next week with more chilly, weird, and fun folklore. But in the meantime, I will keep the fire warm. You have a good night.